Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to this week's podcast episode. So this week we're going to talk about races in Dallas. We're going to talk about a few elections that happened in March and a few runoffs that happened in May. And although there's a lot of candidates that we could talk about, we've chosen 3 just to cut down on some time. And the first one that we're going to talk about is Eddie Bernice Johnson, who announced her retirement last year. And she's been a congresswoman for the 30th District pretty much since the early 90s. In fact, she's the first person to have served in that district, as she was there when they drew up that congressional district. And once she announced her retirement, it seems as if that seat was hot for the taken. Dad, do you have any comments on Bernice Johnson since she's been in office?
Any comments on Congresswoman Johnson? Well, she has served Dallas, we're talking since 1993. Her first term started in January of 93. And she has made a name for herself. I mean, she's very well respected, especially in the Democratic Party. There was a fight for her, who she would support or who she would back. That was very important to many people in running for this race in the Democratic primary. They have a lot of respect. She has been very instrumental involved, but she's very instrumental in liberal policy. I mean, she's a Democrat, but she's also a very liberal Democrat. So if you want to say, I support liberal Democratic policies, you probably like her quite a bit. If you're a Republican, you've probably not been too much of a fan of what some of the legislation she supported over the years. So you just have to be, it's all partisan. Depends on who you ask. It's going to depend on what kind of viewpoint you have of her.
Mm-hmm. And it seems her district really covers South Dallas. So it looks like parts of Mesquite, but it's a district known for a lot of community involvement and community organizations, and especially a lot of grassroots activity, if that makes sense, when it comes to supporting local candidates. So that's one of the races that happened in March, and the person who won that was the person she endorsed, which was Jasmine Crockett. And that was kind of heated because I believe the Democratic Party was supporting someone else, but because Crockett had Bernice Johnson's her endorsement. That was kind of not an easy one for her, but it helped her win that 30th district. And so Jasmine Crockett is a Dallas-based attorney, and according to the Texas Tribune, she kind of sprang to prominence in 2021 when she was a spokesperson on national television for the House Democratic Caucus when the state legislators temporarily relocated to Washington, D.C. to fight the GOP's voting bill. I don't know what that's in reference to, but basically she gained popularity in the media when she was one of their spokespersons, which is always kind of how these things seem to happen. I think Beto O'Rourke kind of has a same trajectory, but whether or not that popularity and trajectory lasts is, soon to be debated. AOC too, she became popular for the way that she did her grassroots activism and rallied people around and all that stuff. Crockett is also very active on social media, which again is good for her in the sense that she can reach younger voters, and it's kind of a detriment to the Democratic Party, who relies more on mainstream media, and older voters are the ones that watch mainstream media and are the ones that tend to typically vote. But of course, if you can utilize social media to your advantage, that's going to help you out in many ways.
Yeah, in the modern world, social media has been a great benefit for, large groups of people, large groups of new politicians, whether on the national level, the state level, or the local level. You don't see it as much because local level is, you got people. A lot of times, and depending on the size of the city or the county, you may know half the candidates if you come from a small populous county that are running. So it's very you don't need a lot of advertisement. You don't need a lot of social media. But in a city, as large as Dallas, it can be a benefit if you can connect with a group of people that then send out your message. Social media kind of relies on I got to get a message to a small group of people who have a lot of followers, and then they kind of push it out even further to their followers, and that really benefits in a local election where the numbers aren't as high. You're not looking to get 1 million votes. You're looking to get tens of thousands of votes. And so a few thousand make, an astronomical difference in whether you win or not. I was going to kind of bring up those numbers. Bernice Johnson, it's a Democratic. Dallas is the majority of Dallas, and then right south of Dallas is a pretty big Democratic stronghold. And I think that reflects in the primary. You look at the 30th Congressional District, and there was 6 candidates running in the original primary back on March 1st. They garnered a total of 10,767 votes. Between 6 candidates, the 2 candidates who won each had more in the Democratic primary. There was a runoff in the Democratic primary. Actually, there was a runoff in the Republican too. But the Democratic primary, where much of the focus is, the 2 leading candidates garnered more total votes individually than the total for all 6 Republican candidates in the primary, which shows, and you can look at this wherever you go, you can kind of tell if it's going to be a red district or a red state or a blue state or a purple state by how the numbers break out in the primary. The primary's equal, the same number of voters show up in each party, then you get kind of a purple race. But if there's a number that's skewed so far one way or the other, this is going to it's going to favor that party tremendously. And that's one of the big deals about how, getting people to vote. They need to feel like they have a voice. And if you're a Republican in a Democratic stronghold, you don't feel like you have much of a voice. So these breaking up of these districts, whether they be at the state level or the national level, is real important that you try to keep them, I would think, for democracy, more equal than to split them up where you're going to have a Democrat come from this district and a Republican come from that district. Sure, the Democrats and Republicans are represented because you have one representative, but that can be still a little skewed. So you always want to look at the numbers for each of these primaries to feel if you've got a good competitive race or not. And the 30th district is probably not going to be that competitive, just looking at the original primary numbers.
And so I didn't know this, but her district kind of encompasses like downtown Dallas, which I was surprised by. So she does kind of cover downtown Dallas. I think that was something that was more recent than when she first began. And then she became the first Black and first female ranking member of the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. This is the part I was going to announce. She is also the first nurse elected to Congress. Her background is as a nurse, as an RN. I did not know that. So going on to, I guess, a little bit of her background. She seems committed to science, space, and technology. She served on transportation and infrastructure committees, and a few other committees that over the years seem to do really with just infrastructure. We see aviation, highways, and transit. Just continued water resources and environment. So I believe that's her one area of I don't want to say expertise, but one area that she's been serving. Focused on, yeah, for a few years.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that whoever replaces her will automatically be put on those committees. Those are when every year comes up. Now, people who have tenure can stay on, certain committees for a while, but a freshman congresswoman or man coming up, they will have, they'll be introduced to a whole new slew of committees that they will be assigned to. They may not necessarily be the same ones. They could be, but not necessarily the same ones as Eddie Bernice Johnson.
And she's not a stranger to controversy. It says, according to Ballotpedia, in 2010, news broke that Johnson had given 23 scholarships from the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation to relatives and relatives of her staff over a 5-year period. This was in violation of both an anti-nepotism rule and a residency requirement of the scholarship. Johnson also specifically requested that the scholarship check be sent directly to her relatives rather than the standard procedure of the money going directly to the university the recipient would be attending. And then she went on to repay the foundation over $31,000. Again, it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. There's always some sort of controversial nepotism act happening. As I learned that the longer that the person serves in an office, there seems to be some sort of nepotism or some sort of controversy that they are in. But and just to go over some key votes, so the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 and Equality Act, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, Build Back Better Act, all the acts that Biden has pushed during his time in office, she's voted yes on. So these are just some of the to give an idea of what her voting background is on.
And the Build Back Better, that's the infrastructure. And it incorporated, more than that, but there was that $1.2 billion infrastructure bill that did get passed, and I think she was involved in that.
And so, it's pretty. I don't want to say standard Democrat, but it's career Democrat official, elected official who's been serving in this capacity since the early '90s, who's retiring, and I don't think there's anything that I don't know if she excites the voters, the young voters, in any other capacity that someone like Jasmine Crockett, who, by the way, Crockett did at one point, I believe last year or the year before obviously Johnson endorsed her, Crockett went on to say something about the fact that Bernice Johnson is a multimillionaire. What is she doing as a multimillionaire in Congress when her background is an RN? So there was, Crockett did at one point, criticize Johnson for her status, her monetary status, I guess. I don't know. So moving on, who's the next candidate we're going to talk about? So we did a national candidate, so let's talk about a state candidate. We have the governor's race.
And we kind of wanted to talk about that one. We're only reporting on local results. We're using the Dallas County website. Any reference to numbers will be using the Dallas County website in what they have gotten for their cumulative totals.
Yeah.
And you can tell this is going to be a Republican state in the Republican primary.
You don't think Beto's going to win?
I'm not going to say who's going to win or who's going to lose. I'm not going down that path. But in the primary, the March 1st primary, and things have changed, obviously, and things will change. They could change either more in favor of Beto O'Rourke's favor if more incidents happen, and it doesn't just have to be a shooting. There could be other things.
Yeah, so the candidates are Greg Abbott and Beto O'Rourke, right, for November 8th? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you can tell, in Dallas County, and this is a Democratic county, the Republicans, the total amount of Republicans on March 1st, the votes were a little over 87,000, of which Mr. Abbott got 57,000. So he won handily. And I think, most people know this isn't brand new news. But the difference there, and I'm going to try to pull this up real quick. I'm scrolling through a lot of pages to get to the other side of the coin.
What are you doing?
I'm looking for what the results for Beto O'Rourke in his
the number
primary.
results?
Yeah. So we want to compare locally. Again, we're talking about Dallas being a Democratic county, and almost there. Here we go. There was 128,000 people who voted in the Democratic primary. So that kind of gives you an idea. We're a red state, but Dallas is a blue county. Because of the turnout. You look at these numbers, and that kind of gives you a hint that we are talking about Democratic candidates in this county. Now, Beto got 120 out of the 128,000 that were voted in the March 1st primary. So that shows you that even though Governor Abbott's real popular in the state, there's going to be a bit of a competition when you look at the large cities, how they vote, because they're going to, produce more votes. So even though it was only a primary, but the significant amount of people who voted in the Democratic primary for governor versus the Republican primary for governor can kind of foretell that, Beto O'Rourke's going to win Dallas come November.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, so this is according to a Quinnipiac poll that was published, I believe, June 15th, so a couple of days ago, so in June, so this month. Texas gubernatorial race between Abbott and O'Rourke tightens, according to the Quinnipiac poll, which is the first poll since the Uvalde shooting. A new Quinnipiac poll shows that Governor Greg Abbott's 15-point lead has shrunk to 5 points after more Texas voters say gun policies are one of their top priorities, which is, not surprising. When a tragedy happens, there's going to be
large human sentiment about, and people are going to react to it. Again, that's why things can, we don't want Uvalde ever to happen again. And so we don't want to base a political race on it either. The fact of the matter is, statewide, Governor Abbott is still garners more support than Beto O'Rourke. Can he use this as a stepping stone to keep it close? We'll find out. But for the local aspect of it, can he pull enough voters out of Dallas to kind of make up that 5%? You talk about shrinking a lead from 15% to 5%. That's how people feel at the moment. Come November, how many people go out and actually vote? Mm-hmm. Whether it's early voting or voting on the day of the election, it becomes real important. Of that 120,000 people he got in the primary, how many more people can he get from Dallas County? Or does Governor Abbott get a few more people out of Dallas County because Republicans weren't concerned about the primary as much? Mm-hmm. So all these little intricacies play out when you talk about these percentages, because it really depends on how motivated do the people get to go out and vote in November. So for Beto's sake, it's great that the lead has shrunk. But what is he going to do between now and then to get these people motivated to vote for him? Because this is a midterm election, and that will affect, even though they always talk about midterm elections, we're talking about nationals when we talk about midterm election. All the state races that are being run are affected by the same issues as the national. So how do people perceive the state of Texas is doing economically? That could help Governor Abbott if people don't feel like the recession is hurting them as bad as it is in other places. Because Governor Abbott can say, the state's doing well considering. That could be a benefit for him. So how these different issues play out become important, and how it gets people to go out and vote.
Mm-hmm. And on that last point about Governor Abbott and compared to the other places, I forgot what your exact sentence was, but having to do with compared to other issues, Governor Abbott is polling favorably. According to a UT Texas poll, Greg Abbott's job approval over the past 2 years has been pretty much even, has been it hasn't been going up, it hasn't been going down significantly. It's been going up and down kind of like a worm, not necessarily like a earth, like lightning strikes where they just go up and down, up and down. It's been pretty significant, even. And when it comes to job approval, and when it comes to border and immigration, it has also been pretty steady. No significant ups, no significant down. The only thing that seems to be significantly impacted is the gun policy. And even then, whether or not that actually influences people to come out in November to vote is a different question or a different story, especially if he's been polling pretty favorably or pretty steady for job approvals, for immigration and border, for the electric grid is one of the places where he has been voted unfavorably?
Yeah, there's an unfavorable opinion in how he handled that situation.
But when it comes to everything else, it seems that he's been voted pretty favorably. Greg Abbott favorability overall. Okay, 2022. Let's see what this says. 33% at unfavorable, and then 22% at very favorable, somewhat favorable. Okay, so it's 22 plus 24 is 46 versus 40. So he's favorable and somewhat favorable at 46%, and then somewhat unfavorable, very unfavorable at 40%. And then there's 13% that don't know, no opinion.
That 13% could make a difference in an election.
True.
If
Yeah.
they're motivated, if something comes up and motivates them,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of people don't know this.
What?
The
What don't I know?
governor of Texas is, I'm not going to say it's a ceremonial position. It has a lot of executive power. But when it comes to legislative power, it's more the lieutenant governor who has a lot more, because he's head of the Senate and a lot of things his legislation is created and he controls what legislation is brought to the Senate floor, the lieutenant governor. So there's an interesting dynamic on what you can hold Governor Abbott accountable for, or, Governor O'Rourke, if that's the case may be next year. So, but this gun issue falls on Governor Abbott more so than a lot of other things that are coming out of the legislation that you see that you don't make the headlines, like the border and immigration. He's done an outsized part in that. He's done an outsized part in Texas gun laws.
Mm-hmm.
So these can be good for him in the border immigration and negative for him in the gun laws, depending on how it gets played out between now and November. So you have to realize, what are you looking for in each position? Because we're going to get into that a little bit more when we talk about our third race.
Well, let's talk about a third race.
Okay. And that's really what boils down to. How much does that person have an effect on each of us individually? And it gets a little bit more, not lower, but as you step down into the local races, and we're going to talk about the district attorney, the attorney's race, because that's going to be an interesting one. If you're in Dallas County, you like watching Dallas County politics, you're probably going to like this one, because we've got two people who have done this job.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we got, and I struggle, John Crusoe, running as a Democrat. And then we have
Faith Johnson
running as a Republican. And she was in the role a while back, and now she's trying to win her seat back, or win the position back. You understand, just generally, what is a district attorney? In Texas, they basically represent the state in prosecuting felony criminal cases. They work with law enforcement in the investigation of criminal cases, and they present cases to a grand jury that's convened. And this is from just a general website that talks about government positions, county.org.
Mm-hmm.
So how much does this affect us? It can affect us a lot more, especially, you're talking about all the crime in Dallas. How are people being prosecuted? Are they actually tough on crime? This is where you get into that. You hear that phrase in all the national politicians. Well, this is where it really comes down, where rubber meets the road. As a district attorney, you are responsible for either being tough on crime or being a little bit more lenient in how you hand out. Well, you don't hand out sentences. You go to the judge and plead your case. We think this person is a dangerous criminal. They need to be locked up for a long time. Or we're willing to accept a lesser plea. This is kind of some circumstances here. We don't think they need to be in jail for 20 years. These are the kind of things that affect individuals. And then we got to have a race that, we'll be watching, because it's going to be very dynamic. We'll get some lull here we're in June, July, August, but come September, when all the races kick up, this is going to be one of the local ones that will make some headlines.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because John Crusoe has a lot of policies aimed at reducing the number of people mired. That's the word used by KERA in the criminal justice system, supposedly without sacrificing public safety. I don't know how true that statement is. I need to be a little bit more prepared and see what the crime statistics here. Let me see right now. Crime statistics in Dallas County over the past 3 years, they could have gone up. Let me see.
Well, all numbers are skewed by the pandemic too.
That's also, and that's another thing. Even if they do go up, part of it could be because people are home, or during 2020 were home, and are homeless or lost their job, or were in desperate situations, and were having to find a way to live. But it says, as violent crime falls in Dallas, this is according to Bloomberg.com, as violent crime falls in Dallas, answers go beyond policing. It says, as other major U.S. cities double down on policing in response to an increase in homicide and violent crimes, Dallas officials are taking a different approach. So this one is really more crediting the new chief, who came into office in 2021. Eddie Garcia, and they don't really mention. This is more of a profile on the police chief than it is on the district attorney.
Yeah, and that's because the police chief is responsible for how the city, runs the police department, and so how are they attacking crime not on the legal sense of it, but in the enforcement of it, or the enforcement of laws and being able to target problem areas, develop plans to, overcome, violent crime. Where are we getting? They did some very targeted work that's in the Dallas Police Department. But when we get into the court system, and that's where you get into that myriad amount of, our cases bogged down. That's one of the things the district attorney is responsible for. Are we, do you want to start letting people out even though they're waiting trial? Who do you let out? These would be decisions that the district attorney would be responsible for. So that's, without hurting public safety, how does he manage to keep the jails from being overcrowded? How does he manage to keep, or whoever the district attorney is, how do they manage to keep the court system flowing, get their cases prepared and ready for trial so they can make determinations, is this person innocent or guilty? And if they're innocent, so they can get out of there. They're not waiting forever to have a trial. That's important, role of the district attorney. So that's where you're going to be more affected by that as an individual if you've already been arrested by the Dallas Police Department, or even some of the other cities in Dallas County. That is what the district attorney is going to be doing, is working to determine what they're going to charge you with, what they can charge you with, where they may run into some problems in a trial, and what works best for your situation. Do they want to get you off the street, or do they not think you're a criminal and this is a one-time mistake? And how do we want to go to the judge? Do we want to, again, plea deal, lesser charge, have them, convicted of being guilty of a major crime?
Okay, so we are adding in this last piece. We're about to wrap up the episode. We got cut off in the middle of one of our sentences when my dad was talking. I did not do that on purpose. Our SD card ran out of information. So you were talking about the district attorney and their role in Dallas County?
Yes. And it ended, I think, when we were talking about how they work with the police department in investigating crimes, and they help the police department determine what are we charging these people with. And there's a lot of interplay in that. But since we're getting ready to wrap up, one of the things I wanted to bring up, because this is going to be a local election, is how close this might be. Because, I've been talking about the numbers a little bit from the primary. And this one, Faith Johnson garnered almost 70,000 votes by herself. There was nobody else in the Republican primary but her. So that's pretty interesting that as a Republican by herself in a local election, not this governor, not the lieutenant governor, not someone running for Congress nationally, she was able to get that many votes in her primary. So we're looking at what the Democrats did, and they, of course, it's going to be a significantly larger number than the Republicans. But I'm really impressed with how much she got people to come out for her.
Well, they didn't just come out for her. They came out for the other Republicans on the ballot, didn't they?
They do, but they used the phrase down ballot. You will see people drop off on how many people get voted for once you get past the top 4 or 5 offices on the top
Yeah.
of the ballot. There's a significant drop off in some cases, in some incidences where, the top of the ballot versus the down ballot, is significantly different. So for her to pull just as much by herself as, Governor Abbott, he only got 50 some odd thousand, close to 60, but she's almost close, she's close to 70. Again, there wasn't anybody running against her, but in a situation where no one's running against her and she garners that much support, people made sure they pulled the lever for her. That says a lot in regards to how interesting this race is going to be once we get to November, and how much support she might be able to pull within the city. Because a lot of the city, Democrat and Republican, isn't as important as the state and national levels. Sure, people do associate Democrat, they do associate Republican, but they also, again, people know people. We're talking about there are going to be many people who know Miss Johnson. There are going to be many people who know John Crusoe. So those dynamics play much more than they would in a national election. People have opinions. They know who they are. They've worked with them. They've met them. They've shook their hand. They've been on some committee with them and some other kind of project. They have favorable or unfavorable opinions on these individuals, not based on whether they're a Democrat or Republican, but their interactions with them. So local elections are a lot more interesting when it comes to this, but I do want to kind of bring up the numbers. Here we go. The 2 candidates that ran in the Democrat primary garnered 123,000 votes between the two of them. Almost 72,000 was for John Crusoe. So it's, will the people who voted for the other candidate
It's
stay
70,000
Democrat?
versus 72,000?
It's 70. It was based on the primaries. It's 72,000 versus almost 70,000.
Okay.
The big kicker is, again, the Democrats pulled in 123 total.
Mm-hmm.
Will the people who voted for Miss Frizzell stay home, or will they support for Crusoe? That's what we'll find out in November.
All right. So stay tuned, and we're wrapping this up. We will talk to you next time.